the shopping trip. When Bob and John arrived at the mall, they chose a parking spot away from the main entrance, hoping to avoid too much attention. However, as they walked toward the door, they realized that the long stroll only made them more noticeable to other shoppers arriving at the mall. While not everyone took much notice, both Bob and John knew they would soon draw plenty of eyes as the day went on. Their first stop, as instructed, was the nail salon. They were seated in the front window, where they could be seen by anyone walking past. The manicurists applied elegant nail extensions, carefully painting their nails in complementary colors. Bob's nails were done in pink, while John's were done in lavender. Their toenails were also painted, and they had to sit for a while, allowing the polish to dry. Each time someone walked by and noticed, the boys couldn't help but feel self-conscious. A few shoppers paused to stare, giggling when they realized what they were seeing. The manicurists seemed to take pleasure in the boys' unease. After paying for their manicures and pedicures, Bob and John made their way to their next stop, the earring kiosk. To Bob's surprise, the same girl who had pierced his ears previously was working that day. At first, she didn't immediately recognize Bob, though she could tell something was different about the two boys dressed in their feminine attire. John, somewhat shy, explained that he wanted to get his ears double pierced and also asked for a monogrammed ankle bracelet. When the girl asked for the name to be engraved, she glanced at Bob and realized who he was. As John replied, "Jenny with an I," the girls smiled knowingly and began to work on John's ears, double piercing them with small studs in one set of holes and tiny hoops in the others. After finishing with John, she turned to Bob. "So, Missy," she said playfully, "why didn't you wear a skirt today? You looked so cute the last time I saw you." Bob blushed deeply. "Our wives wanted us to dress this way today to, well, get as much attention as possible," he explained. "Where did you find this one?" the girl teased, nodding toward John. "Did you bring him into the world of fashion too?" "No, he's my secretary's husband," Bob responded. "Our wives are the ones behind all of this." "Well, you two are certainly precious," the girl continued. "I love how your wives have sent you to the mall looking this way. It's much more fun when everyone knows what you're doing, rather than just a few people catching on." She smiled at the boys as she finished her work. "Go finish your shopping and come back later so I can check out those piercings." Feeling embarrassed but resigned, Bob and John left the kiosk and headed to the shoe store. Karen had specifically asked them to request Ken, the flamboyant salesperson, to help with their purchases. When they entered the store, it was busy and Ken was assisting other customers. Bob and John took a seat, waiting for him, and as they did, they became the subject of whispers and giggles from the other shoppers. Ken eventually finished with his customers and moved over to Bob and John, sitting in front of them on a small stool. "Hi, ladies," Ken said with a grin. "What can I help you with today?" Bob and John, slightly nervous, explained that they were looking for sandals with at least a 3-inch heel and a strappy design. "Perfect," Ken exclaimed. "Let's get you fitted. Please take off your shoes and I'll get your sizes." Bob and John, now feeling even more self-conscious, removed their shoes, revealing their painted toenails and ankle bracelets. Ken, who had an eye for detail, commented on their accessories. "Those ankle bracelets are adorable. And is that your names engraved on them? Missy and Jenny?" "Oh, how sweet," he said, his voice slightly louder than Bob and John would have liked. Both boys turned even redder, shrinking further into their seats, but Ken was unfazed. He began pulling out different boxes of sandals and tried them on the boys, asking them to stand and walk to get a feel for the shoes. "Come on, my little lovelies," Ken said with a playful tone. "Let's show the other customers how fabulous you look. These heels are just the right height, and those straps are fabulous." Despite their discomfort, Bob and John reluctantly stood and walked around the store in the sandals. Ken was enthusiastic, encouraging them to model the shoes for the other customers, while the two boys tried to avoid drawing too much attention. After what felt like an eternity, they finally paid for their new sandals and quickly left the store, their faces flushed from the laughter and glances they had received. They could hear the giggles and sighs from the shoppers behind them, but all they could think about was escaping the store. Lunch with the girls. Outside the shoe store, Bob suddenly noticed it was almost noon. Worried about being late, he and John quickly hurried through the mall to meet their wives at Hooters, hoping to avoid drawing attention. However, their attempts at discretion were futile, as their appearance was already attracting stares. The two, dressed in their coordinating outfits, walked through the mall to the food court, where they would meet Karen and Carol, who were already seated. As they entered the restaurant, Bob and John had to walk through the large dining area to reach their wives' booth. This walk, though brief, ensured that everyone in the room had a clear view of their outfits. Bob and John could feel the eyes of the other diners on them as they passed. The wives smiled and waved as they saw their husbands approach, delighting in their reactions. Once the two sat down across from their wives, Carol asked, "How was the shopping, girls?" Bob and John, both feeling shy and embarrassed, mumbled that it had been fine, holding their menus up to shield their faces. The waitress, dressed in the iconic Hooters uniform, caught sight of the boys and couldn't resist a comment. "Usually, I have to worry about getting hit on by guys, but I don't think that will be an issue at this table," the waitress said with a smile. "No," Karen replied playfully, "I don't think they'll be giving you any trouble. They're probably too busy admiring your outfit." Carol ordered a light lunch for Bob and John, making sure they had plenty of iced tea. She instructed the waitress to keep their glasses full, which made Bob and John feel even more self-conscious as they slowly sipped their drinks. Soon, they both started shifting in their seats, clearly needing a break. Carol noticed and teased, "Are you two going to keep squirming, or will you go ahead and use the restroom?" "Yes, don't forget your bags," Karen added, laughing. "You might want to freshen up a bit while you're in there." Blushing, Bob and John excused themselves from the table and walked toward the restrooms, holding hands as instructed. Their nerves were heightened by the whispers and giggles they heard from other diners. Just outside the men's room, a man from a nearby table called out, "What are you two doing going into the men's room?" Bob, trying to keep his composure, replied, "We'd get in trouble if we went into the women's room." The man gave them a curious look but allowed them to enter. Inside, Bob and John tried to go about their business as quickly as possible. As they exited the stalls, they were met by a couple of men from a nearby table, who began questioning them. "What are your names?" one asked, his tone blunt. "I'm Bob, and he's John," Bob answered quietly. The other man scoffed, "You don't look like a Bob to me." "What are your real names, huh?" Bob, now very uncomfortable, replied softly, "Missy." John, his voice shaking, added, "Jenny." They both pleaded with the men to let them leave in peace, but the men continued teasing them about their clothes. They were forced to describe each other's outfits in detail, from the fabrics to the colors, their discomfort growing with every word. After what felt like an eternity, the men allowed them to leave, but not before making a few more remarks. Bob and John quickly returned to their table, trying to hold back their tears. Their wives, however, seemed entirely unbothered and insisted that they finish their meal. After lunch, Karen and Carol instructed Bob and John to buy Hooters uniforms from the hostess, though they didn't have to try them on. The two husbands were already red-faced with embarrassment, but their day was far from over. Carol and Karen had another surprise waiting, a trip to a beauty salon for facials and makeovers. When they arrived, the owner of the salon seemed to be expecting them. She greeted Carol and then turned to the two boys with a smile. "Well, these must be the two we've been expecting," she said. "They look darling, but they'll look even more precious after we're done with them." They were each shown to a chair, wrapped in pale pink smocks, and given facials followed by subtle makeovers. The other customers at the salon had mixed reactions, some teasing the boys, while others looked on with mild disapproval. After their treatments, Bob and John, exhausted and humiliated, begged their wives to let them leave. However, Karen had one more stop in mind. "We need to see you in those sandals," Karen said. "And they should really be wearing hose instead of their socks," Carol added. "Let's go to Macy's and pick some out." Reluctantly, the two boys followed their wives to Macy's. There, they were sent to the hosiery department to pick out some sheer white pantyhose. They nervously asked the sales clerk for help in selecting the right size and then hurried to pay. As they were checking out, the clerk handed them a frequent shopper card for hosiery, and the two boys couldn't wait to leave the store. The clack of their sandals echoed in the store as they hurried to the coffee shop to meet their wives. They could hear the giggles and whispers as they walked, but at least they were almost done. At the coffee shop, Bob and John begged their wives to finally let them go home. After a long day of shopping and humiliation, Karen and Carol finally agreed. But when the two boys realized they were on the opposite side of the mall from their car, they knew their final walk would be just as embarrassing. Their heels clicked loudly on the floor as they made their way across the mall, their faces flushed with shame. Finally, in the safety of the car, Bob and John let out a sigh of relief, but both dreaded what the future would hold. Epilogue. What lies ahead for Bob and John? With Karen and Carol's imaginative plans, their lives are sure to be full of new experiences, many of which will challenge their sense of identity. Will Bob's newfound style influence his work life? Will John's passion for his ranch and horses change with his growing self-awareness? One thing is for sure, their wives are determined to keep them on their toes, with many more adventures awaiting these two unlikely husbands.